morning. How's that?
Okay.
Now, if you have to...
Excuse me.
Hello. Well, my neighbor's medium-duty truck problem was a problem for me, too. Because all I normally sell are cars and light-duty trucks. So, first thing Monday morning, I paid a visit to our truck manager for some help. So what do you think, Ed? Does he need that 5,000-pound front axle or the 7,000?
Well, the best way to find that out is to make a weight distribution calculation, Charlie.
Oh, that sounds complicated.
There's not much to it, actually. It's something you can do quickly and easily to make sure that the customer gets the right truck for the job. Hey, look, Charlie, I've got a customer waiting. While I handle that, take a look at this new video disc on truck weight distribution. Then I'll get back to you and we'll talk about your problem.
Calculating truck weight distribution is really quite simple. The only time you have to consider it is when you're selling a truck like this one with a separate body, such as a van, dump, tank, service utility, or flatbed stake. You want to provide the customer with the right truck, the one that positions the right amount of payload and body weight on each of these axles, so the components won't be under-spec'd and overloaded, subjected to extra stress and wear that can result in costly repairs and reduced truck life. On the other hand, over-spec'd components with too much capacity can increase the initial cost, add unnecessary weight, and result in a harsh ride. Good weight distribution is when the front and rear axles share the load properly within the rated capacities of axles, springs, wheels, and tires. This rating is often referred to as the gross axle weight rating, or GAWR for short. Here's a quick demonstration of the difference between good and bad weight distribution. Let's say this is your customer's truck. And for this demonstration, we've zeroed the scales to disregard the weight of the chassis. Now we'll add a van body and assume water level loading. This line represents the midpoint of the body and the center of gravity of the weight of the body and payload. In this case, the center of gravity is directly over the rear axle. And these scales help illustrate that 100% of the body and payload weight is on the rear axle. Obviously, the rear axle is doing all of the load-carrying work, perhaps beyond its rated capacity. What if you select an even shorter wheelbase for this customer? This places the center of gravity behind the rear axle, and as the scales show, because of a teeter-totter effect, transfers even more weight to the rear axle and less to the front. Remember, good weight distribution is selecting a wheelbase that puts a proper amount of that body and payload weight on the front axle as well as the rear. Now, with a longer wheelbase, the center of gravity is ahead of the rear axle, and the scales show that the front axle is now supporting some of the body and payload weight. So a rule of good weight distribution is to select a chassis and body combination that centers the body slightly ahead of the rear axle, spreading the weight properly between the two axles without overloading either. Here, the axles are sharing the work. But how much of the combined vehicle, body, and payload weight is on each axle? We need to know that to be sure that the weight on each axle does not exceed the gross axle weight rating. Let's say this is the truck you've selected for your customer. There's a simple formula you can use to check the total weight on each axle. It's an easy computation based on these 4 dimensions. The cab-to-axle dimension, found in the data book. The clearance between cab and body, an industry standard. The body length, obtained from the customer, and the wheelbase, found in the data book. Now we're going to use those dimensions in this formula. CA minus BC minus 1/2 BL divided by WB, and work it out to show how we determine what percentage of the total weight is on the front axle. For the purpose of this demonstration, let's assign some numbers to those dimensions. Take the 84-inch cab-to-axle dimension. Subtract the standard 3-inch clearance between cab and body, Then subtract 1/2 of the 12-foot body length, which is 72 inches. When you do that simple subtraction, you wind up with this, 9 inches, to be divided by the wheelbase, which on this truck is 149 inches. 9 divided by 149 comes out to .06, which is 6/100, or 6%. So we see that 6% of the body and payload weight is on the front axle, which means that 94% is on the rear axle. Now all you have to do is check the specifications of the truck. Turn these percentages into actual pounds of weight on each axle and add the weight of the truck itself to make sure the totals don't exceed gross axle weight ratings.
I could see from the film that the formula was simple enough, and I'd need some specific information from my neighbor about the trucks he was using now, so I could work on solving his problem. He was no truck expert by any means, but he could give me a few basic facts, which is all I needed. I learned that he had been using a medium-duty conventional cab with a single rear axle, that the weight of his cargo was about 10,000 pounds, and that the weight of his 15-foot body was 4,000 pounds. He also knew that he had been using a 189-inch wheelbase. Now I was ready to make like a pro. Figured the weight distribution for him to make sure he'd get the right chassis components for the load. I told him I'd call back in a little while. I talked to the truck manager about it. He showed me that I could complete the weight distribution tally by using only 2 pages in the data book. First, I needed to know the weight of the base truck itself, without body or cargo. He suggested that, based on the information I had obtained, we should zero in on the C60 series. He told me to look on page 1 of the C6 D042 section under 97.5-inch conventional cabs. I saw that there was 3,385 pounds on the front, 2,098 pounds on the rear, before the body and payload was added. I also needed to know the standard front and rear axle capacities of this model. They were listed below. Standard 15,000-pound rear axle, standard 5,000-pound front axle. When I had all of this information down, I'd started a neat list of weights. Then, Ed told me to look on page 9 of that same section, under wheelbases, to find out how much add-on weight is required by the optional 189-inch wheelbase. I had to add 116 pounds on the front, 237 pounds on the rear. Finally, I put down the total vehicle weight, front and rear, which was the weight of the base truck plus the wheelbase option. Now I was ready to figure the distribution of the body and payload weight on the front and rear axles, using the formula. Cab to axle minus body clearance minus 1/2 body length, divided by the wheelbase. Page 9 showed that the truck had a 124-inch cab-to-axle dimension. Next, the information that Bob gave me came into play. So, from 124, I subtracted the standard 3-inch body clearance dimension and 1/2 of the body length, 15 times 12 divided by 2, 90 inches. 124 minus 3 minus 90, which gives 31 inches. Dividing by the wheelbase, which was 189 inches, equals, I had the answer, which rounded off to 16/100 or 16%. That meant that 84% of that weight was on the rear axle. Now, how did that compare with the front and rear axle ratings? Well, I knew that the weight of the cargo was 10,000 pounds, and that 16% of that weight was on the front axle. 16% of 10,000 pounds was 1,600 pounds on the front. That left 8,400 pounds on the rear. I also knew that his body weight was about 4,000 pounds, with 16% on the front and 84% on the rear. That came to 640 pounds on the front and 3,360 pounds on the rear. Now I had it all written down, so I could go ahead and total the weights to see if they were within the truck's gross axle weight ratings. Comparing the total front weight figures with the GAWR, I saw that the front weight was 741 pounds over. This meant that the 7,000-pound front axle would be required. I also found that at 14,095 pounds, the standard 15,000-pound rear axle was okay. Bob, this is Charlie. I checked into your problem. Found out you do need that 7,000-pound front axle. Are you going to be home this evening? Well, Ed, my neighbor was real impressed with my answer to his weight distribution problem, and he wants me to work out a deal for him.
Well, that's great. Let's get together this afternoon and I'll show you how to use the data book to spec out the total truck for the job.
Fine.
You bet. Those new Chevy trucks we got are great. You know, I almost ordered the wrong front axle on those trucks, and that could have caused a lot of costly downtime. Let me tell you, if you got a problem, you call my friend Charlie. He impressed me to the point where I gave him all my business. I ordered a new car yesterday. Of course I'm sure he can help you. He's a pro.